Well, hello. My name is Douglas Craig, and I work in the School of History here at the ANU. And today it's my great honour to talk with Professor David Farber, who is this year's School of History Allan Martin Guest Lecturer. And every year the School of History has a visiting lecture program. The lecturer is here for a week, and the flagship event of that week is the public lecture. And on Wednesday, the 14th of May, David will be giving his public lecture in the Canberra area of the campus, the event space T2. And David's lecture is going to be called Trump's Republic and American History. We're very lucky to have Professor Farber here as our Allan Martin lecturer this year. David has had a distinguished career in American history, which is very much in full flood. David did his graduate work at the University of Chicago. He then went on to work at Barnard College, the University of New Mexico, Temple University, and in 2015 he took up his current role, which is as a distinguished professor at the University of Kansas in Lawrence. And along the way, David has published many works. I think there are 16 as author or collator of edited collections. Page after page of scholarly articles on a whole range of topics, primarily on post-war United States history. But David has done a lot of well-regarded and very influential work on conservatism in the United States. He's very important in the history of the 1960s. And his most recent book, his 16th, I believe, will come out in September 2019 from the University of Cambridge Press. And it's a history of crack, the street drug, which plays a very prominent role in African-American street economies. And David's book cleverly ties in the story of a pernicious drug which has ravaged the African-American community and other communities in the United States with the history of capitalism. And David's book positions crack and the street drug trade as an epitome of capitalism in its most extreme, ruthless, and in many ways lucrative forms. But anyway, David, thank you for coming, and thank you for coming all this way, and thank you for talking to me today.
Good to be here, Doug.
You're giving a public lecture tomorrow about Donald Trump in his historical context. And I thought we might begin by me asking you a question that imagine if your next book would be on this general topic of Trump as a historical phenomenon and putting President Trump in his historical context. Where would you begin that book, assuming that space was no object? Where would your chapter 1 begin with?
I think the trick in writing a book about antecedents to Donald Trump is that it's multiple histories. So I think several stories would have to be told. Maybe the first story is the most proximate, which is the story of American conservatism. So in that sense, I'd probably start the work in the 1930s, when the great challenge to New Deal liberalism arose with a conservative counterattack. But as you suggest, it's also a history of populism. It's a history of demagoguery in the United States. It's a more broad history of what the constitutional republic of the United States was supposed to be. So it's an 18th century story, a 19th century story, a 20th century story, and most certainly a 21st century story.
Do you think it'll be a 21st century story beyond Trump? That is to say, do you see Trump as the beginning of something, or do you see it as a spectacular one-off candidacy and presidency?
Trump is unique. He is an individual that I would expect we will not see the likes of again in my lifetime, at least. But as an emblem of what democratic culture in the United States is becoming, I think he's actually a fairly emblematic figure. So while he himself, in all his zaniness, is unique, the problems he attempted to represent to the American people are the ones we're going to wrangle with, at least for the next several decades in the United States. We're a post-Cold War, post-superpower nation, and Trump made us think again, for better and for worse, mostly my thoughts for the worse, about what is our responsibility to the rest of the world as a great nation in the world. What does capitalism look like in the 21st century? How do we reckon with the fact that high-wage societies are going to have a great deal of difficulty maintaining reasonable lives for working class people in the global economy. We're all going to wrestle with the demographic changes that the world presents, especially for old Europe, places like Australia, the United States, Canada, and other countries like it. So Trump is right at the interstices of the crisis of democracy and the crisis of global capitalism that we're all going to be working very hard to solve over the next decades.
The rest of us in the world tend to see Trump as a very American phenomenon. But in fact, you could argue just as well that he's a part of a global phenomenon.
That's right.
After all, Brexit. There's nothing particularly American about worries about China, worries about immigrants, worries about our place in an industrial world. Do you see him ultimately as a American phenomenon or as part of a broader global phenomenon?
He's an American variant of a global phenomenon. So I think in many countries around the world, we're seeing the rise of a kind of reactionary populism. It's happening in countries as diverse as Hungary, Russia, Turkey, the United States. I'll leave Australia out of the story, but it's certainly something that's happening around the world as, again, I think people who've long been in dominant positions within their society are trying to make sense of the demographic changes that they're facing and the contestations over who will triumph in the global economy. So we're, in the United States, going through this as a superpower, and that gives us a very different kind of variant, a bullying variant perhaps, as compared to, let's say, Hungary, where the reactionary populism is very internal in its determinants. We get to play global bully. And so Trump is both an American actor and very much representative of an international turn.
Of course, international relations specialists tell us that there is no power more dangerous than a major power in decline. After all, if Hungary goes or Australia goes in decline, it's of far less global import. Do you worry about the often called irresponsibility or perhaps the recklessness of a great power in decline?
So the United States, arguably for some 20 years nearly, has been dabbling in reckless policies. What happened in Iraq is a kind of tragedy in retrospect. What happened in Afghanistan destabilized much of the region as well. So, yeah, there's a danger when an extraordinarily powerful and wealthy country isn't quite sure what its power should be anymore. So that is the case of the United States. Some of what Trump is doing is sensible. We're in a post-Cold War world. The United States' obligations to Western Europe, to much of the free world, the free capitalist world, they had to change. But his inability sometimes to work in a multilateral setting, to try to figure out how we work as a collective to responsibly face what are real crises, that's scary stuff. And I think Donald Trump in particular does not have a sense of history. He doesn't have a sense of how really global capitalism works. And so having a president without that kind of wisdom, and he doesn't have much wisdom, is unsettling. My sense is he might only be in office a couple more years, and while the problems will remain, I think the kind of unhinged leadership that Trump shows will hopefully not allow the United States to do something of extraordinarily reckless nature. I'm an optimist about that.
One of your many books was entitled, forgive me if I'm approximate, but Of What the World Thinks of Us. And you have long been interested in perceptions of the United States by other nations. Do you worry that Trump's presidency has materially worsened that trend that you identified well before Trump?
I do think that it's problematic. I think we saw what I thought was the nadir of U.S.'s place in the world in the midst of the war that went so wrong in Iraq. But Trump has managed to double down on that. So while world opinion rose quite a bit in most countries of the world during the Obama presidency, and that was not that long ago, Trump has made a blow against the United States, especially with our closest allies. I mean, that's the irony, where he badmouths Australia, who's been there thick and thin. He badmouths Great Britain, who's been there through thick and thin. He picks a fight with Canada, who's been our strongest ally and probably arguably our most important trading partner. So self-inflicted wounds with our closest allies is a riddle. That he's also picking a fight with Russia, that he's picking a fight with China, that he finds enemies throughout the world. It's unsettling. Again, I think if he loses power in 2 years, things are remediable. If not, then the world says, actually, Americans like this guy. They like what he's doing. And then things become far more precipitously risky.
One of our former Prime Ministers, Paul Keating, once famously said, change the government and you change the country. In the American context with the division of powers, but the presidency is very important. Do you think that even if Trump holds only one term and does not seek or does not win a second, that he has changed America for the medium term?
I think he's demonstrated to the world and has revealed to the educated elites in the United States that there's a lot of anger and frustration in the United States, and that a lot of Americans don't know where to turn to feel safe and secure in a very quickly changing world. And I think that won't go away, no matter who wins the presidency. And that kind of fear, as you said earlier, within an extraordinarily powerful country is a risky proposition. So yeah, the underlying fears and angers don't disappear whether Trump wins or loses. And within the United States, there's a real struggle to try to find a sense of what's next for the United States. And I don't think any Democratic candidate for the presidency has a good answer to that yet.
Well, thank you, and thank you for talking to me. And to remind, that Professor Farber's public lecture will be on Wednesday, May 14th at 6:30 p.m, and he'll be delivering that lecture in the Canberra event area of the ANU campus. You will need to get tickets, but the tickets are free, and you can find information on the School of History website. But David, thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you, Doug.
Wow.